In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order of the Abracast. We are the brave and bold.
The Abracast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
Your body is your temple, so let's make sure you got a badass t-shirt on it. Variety of cool occult themed t-shirts. And other merch like stickers, wall art, mugs, and more. Visit the storefront on abracast.com.
All right, welcome to the Abracast. This is John Towers. And before we get started, I'd like to encourage everyone to rate and review on iTunes, visit the website, find my social media links, and if this is on the mainstream at some point in time, check out the Patreon. If not, that's the only place you're going to get it is on the Patreon anyway. So tonight we're talking about the many lessons of Liber 4, Part 1, Mysticism. So I just did 3 nights of going through Part 1 of Crowley's magnum opus, Liber 4 or Liber ABA. It's called Liber ABA, ABA, because of the English gematria Crowley used. So A equals 1, B equals 2, A equals 1, 1 plus 2 plus 1 is 4. And it's also just simply called the book, or it's simply just called MAGICK. And this is where chapter or part 3 is actually famous. It's the famous I don't have it written down. That's what I get for going off script. Magic in practice and theory. So this is a huge book. Eventually we're going to get through the whole thing. We just started here, as you do at the beginning. We're going to go through, we're going to go through this because as I was going through it, I found a lot of interesting lessons. I've mentioned on the show prior that I have issues relaxing, focusing, quieting the mind. So I thought it was pretty serendipitous that Liber 4 was up next on our schedule. And that it was diving into, it might provide me some insight. If you've been listening to the show, that Crowley actually helped me break some bad habits with Liber 3. So I was pretty excited when I realized that part 1, the part that we're talking about, and the part that I spent all week working on and thinking about and recording about, is all about this sort of system of yoga, or that's not right. It's a collection of practices used to meditate, including yoga or asana. Part 1, Mysticism. It's got a pretty long subtitle. It's called the meditation, the way of attaining the genius or godhead considered as a development of the human brain. The term genius here is not just a real smart dude. Or person. It's like the Hindi meaning, the base nature or the pure creative nature of God. So I stole this from Wiki. Here we go. Crowley's yoga involves several key components. The first is Asana, which is the assumption of any easy, steady, and comfortable posture. Next is Pranayama, which is the control of breath, and Mantra Yoga, which is the use of mantras. Yama and Niyama are adopted moral or behavioral codes that will be least likely to excite the mind. Pratyahara is the stilling of thoughts so that the mind becomes quiet, and Dharana is the beginning of concentration, usually on a single shape like a triangle, which eventually leads to dhyana, the loss of distinction between object and subject, which can be described as the annihilation of ego. The final stage is Samadhi, union with the all. So first off is his preliminary remarks, where there's a few cool things going down, right? Hold on. Oh my God. We start by talking about a few of these stories of a few spiritual leaders and the origins of religion itself. He talks specifically about Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Moses, and Paul, stated here in no particular order. Where in all these cases, these supermen, they're all disappeared for a time, and upon their return, they are able to shape these huge cultural religions. These guys were mostly nobodies, without rank, without religion, or without riches, who went away, and when they returned, they were somebodies. They returned poor and alone. There are some diversity in their stories, especially, I guess, with Moses, who was actually a prince before he killed the Egyptian guard. But a lot of them hit pretty similar notes in their stories. So we're going to go to the book here. What was the nature of their power? What happened to them in their absence? History will not help us solve the problem, for history is silent. We have only the accounts given by the men themselves. It would be very remarkable should we find these accounts agree. Of the great teachers we have mentioned, Christ is silent. The other four tell us something more, some less. Buddha goes into detail too elaborate to enter upon this place, but the gist of it is that in one way or another, he got hold of a secret force of the world and mastered it. Of St. Paul's experience, we have nothing but a casual allusion to his having been caught up to heaven, and see and hear things of which were not lawful to speak. Muhammad speaks crudely of having been visited by the angel Gabriel, who communicated things from God. And Moses says that he beheld God. He actually got to see God's ass, which is pretty crazy. I actually mirror that in the not mirror it. I kind of like reference it in the Ages where God's facing down Leviathan. You got to see God's butt. Diverse as these statements are at first sight, they all agree in announcing an experience of the class which 50 years ago would have been called supernatural, today may be called spiritual, and 50 years hence will have the proper name based on the understanding of the phenomenon which occurred. Theorists have been at a loss to explain, but they differ. Theorists have not been at a loss to explain, but they differ. Though Mohammedan insists that God is and did really send Gabriel with messages for Muhammad, but all others contradict him, and from the nature of the case, proof is impossible. The lack of proof has been so severely felt by Christianity and by a much lesser degree by Islam. The fresh miracles have been manufactured almost daily to support the tottering structure. Modern thought rejecting these miracles, the adopted theories involving epilepsy and madness, as if an organization could spring from disorganization. Even if epilepsy were the cause of these great movements, which have caused civilization after civilization to rise up from barbarism, it would be merely from an argument for cultivating epilepsy. Of course, great men will never conform with the standards of little men, and whose mission is to overturn the world, can hardly escape the title of revolutionary. The fads of a period always furnish terms of abuse. The fad of Caiaphas was Judaism, and the Pharisees told him that Christ blasphemed. Pilate was a loyal Roman. To him they accused Christ of sedition. When the Pope had all power, it was necessary to prove an enemy a heretic. Advancing today towards the medical oligarchy, we try to prove that our opponents are insane, and in a Puritan country to attack their morals. We should then avoid all rhetoric and try to investigate with perfect freedom from bias the phenomenon which occurred to these great leaders of mankind. There is no difficulty in assuming that these men themselves did not understand clearly what happened to them. The only one who explains his system thoroughly is Buddha. Buddha is the only one that is not dogmatic. We may also suppose that the others thought it inadvisable to explain too clearly to their followers. St. Paul evidently took this line. Our best documents will therefore be the system of Buddha. It is so complex that no immediate summary will serve. And in this case of the others, we have not the accounts of the masters. We have those of their immediate followers. The methods advised by all these people have a startling resemblance to one another. They recommend virtue, solitude, abstinence of excitement, moderation in diet, and finally a practice which some call prayer and some call meditation. On investigating what is meant by these two things, we find there are only one. For what is the state of either prayer or meditation? It is the restraining of the mind to a single act, state, or thought. If we sit down quietly and investigate the contents of our minds, we shall find that even the best of times, the principal characteristics are wandering and distraction. Anyone who has had anything to do with children and untrained minds generally knows that fixity of attention is never present, even when there is a large amount of intelligence and goodwill. If then we, with our well-trained minds, determine to control this wandering thought, we shall find that we are fairly well able to keep the thoughts running in a narrow channel. Each thought linked to the last in a perfectly rational manner. But if we attempt to stop this current, we shall find that so far from succeeding, we shall merely bread down the banks of the channel. The mind will overflow, and instead of a chain of thoughts, we shall have chaos of confused images. The mental activity is so great and seems so unnatural that it's hard to understand how anyone first got the idea that it was a weakness and a nuisance. Perhaps it was because in the more natural practice of devotion, people found that their thoughts interfered. In any case, calm and self-control are to be preferred to restlessness. Darwin, in his own study, Darwin, in his study, presents a marked contrast with a monkey in a cage. Generally speaking, the larger and stronger and more highly developed any animal is, the less does it move about, and such movements as it does make are slow and purposeful. Compare the ceaseless activity of bacteria and the reasoned steadiness of the beaver. And except in the few animal communities which are organized, such as bees, the greatest intelligence is shown by those of solitary habits. This is so true of man that psychologists have been obliged to treat of the mental state of crowds as if it were totally different in quality from any state possible to an individual. So it is then by freeing the mind from external influence, whether casual or emotional, that it obtains the power to see somewhat of the truth of things. So as we move into the chapter 1 proper, we find this last bit here fascinating. As it will be seen later, the vision of God, or union with God, or Samadhi, or whatever we may agree to call it, has many kinds and degrees. Although there is an impassable abyss between the least of them, the greatest of all phenomenon of normal consciousness. To sum up, we assert a secret source of energy which explains the phenomenon of genius. We do not believe in any supernatural explanations, but insist that this source may be reached by the following. Out of the definite rules, the degree of success depends upon the capacity of the seeker, and not upon the favor of any divine being. We assert that the critical phenomenon which determines success is an occurrence in the brain characterized essentially by the uniting of subject and object. We pronounce to discuss this phenomenon, analyze its true nature, determine accurately the physical, mental, and moral conditions which are favorable to it, and ascertain its cause, and thus to produce it in ourselves so that we may adequately study its effects. So chapter 1 is Asana, and it's all about Crowley's, system of yoga. I think it's very interesting, especially when we get into stripping of the morality of it, but as a non-yoga person, this doesn't sound like the hot yoga classes are all about. It's not the yoga class I could see from the treadmills at LA Fitness. He starts by talking about choosing an uncomfortable position. He says any posture will become uncomfortable over time, but you should sort of choose one that's going to suck anyways as a form of practice. And I'm familiar with this. I am familiar with this. It's a military discipline. You stand at the position of attention for a super long time. You don't lock your knees. You keep your head up. You breathe. It gets to be uncomfortable, and a lot of times, like he's going to talk here a little bit, or he did talk here a little bit about the itching that occurs when you're trying to stay still, and that's something the military shakes right out of you. It shakes the ability. It is a shortcut of this thing of asana. If stilling your body as part of it, the military will help you get there. And that's just like drill and ceremony stuff. Like that's not even like impromptu punishment. Like they put you in these weird, like sitting in an invisible chair against a wall, which does not sound like a big deal. But around minute 4, it starts to become a problem for you. And they're practicing with these positions, the cramping and the itching and the aching and the pains will eventually stop. Back to the book. perhaps the reward is not so far distant. It will happen one day that the pain is suddenly forgotten, and the fact of the presence of the body is forgotten. And one will realize that during the whole of one's previous life, the body was always on the borderland of consciousness, and that consciousness of pain, and that the moment one will further realize that an indescribable feeling of relief, that not only is this position which has been so painful the very ideal of physical comfort, that all other conceivable positions of the body are uncomfortable. This feeling represents success. There will be no further difficulty in practice, and one will get into the asana with almost the same feeling as that of which a tired man gets into a hot bath. And while he is in that position, the body may be trusted to send him no message that might disturb his mind. So, some of the things that he talked about in this chapter, that I found super interesting, is he did say that all positions are going to suck. But he says to choose one that is cramped and uncomfortable. And then they list off some of these positions. They list off one called the God, which is basically you're sitting upright in a chair with your hands on your thighs. Feet flat on the ground. And that's probably the most innocuous of them. The other one, or one of the other ones, is called the Dragon, and it's where you sit. So you sit on your heels and your toes are folded back, like you're kneeling on, and you're sitting on your heels with your toes folded back, and you put your hands on your thighs. And that's called the Dragon. And I can tell you, because that's the one that I chose to practice with this week. And I chose it for two reasons. One is I couldn't do one of the other ones for a long time, and I couldn't even figure out what the fuck he was talking about for the fourth one. So I chose, and I didn't want to choose the sitting down one. I thought that was kind of like a pussy way out, sort of. So I chose the Dragon. And the other reason I chose the Dragon is because I have awful knees. I started destroying my knees when I was 15 years old, skateboarding without knee pads. And it just, through the whole army, I scraped a lot of my cartilage off. And then when I was wrestling, it didn't do me any favors. So, like, my knees are awful all the time. And I have gout. So, I'm sorry, I have the gout. If you ever had the gout, you would not just call it gout, because that is disrespectful. It's the painfulest thing ever. Anyhow, so I figured that I would do that one, and that would help me reach this level of mastery, or at least try to understand what he's talking about when he's saying eventually the pain will go away. And he says in here, you will realize that the pain is gone away because your body doesn't mean anything. Like your body, in this exercise you're doing, your body is pointless. And the whole point of it being this uncomfortableness is that when the uncomfortableness goes away, you distance yourself farther from this like material plane. And I really dug it because it was like kind of Gnostic, like, so I thought that was super interesting. And I'm no closer, that I've been working with this Dragon position all week, and I'm no closer to getting to this part where it's okay. The other two positions was one that's called the ibis, and it's where you stand on one, like you hold your left foot with your right hand, and you put your finger over your mouth, like the sign of our boy Harpocrates. I could do that for a little bit, but I can't do it for a long time. My balance isn't all there anymore. And the other one was called the Thunderbolt. And I looked at the Thunderbolt yoga position online, and this is not what he's talking about at all. He's saying that you have to somehow sit on your left foot so your heel is pressing against your anus. and your right leg is folded in front of you, and your foot is pointed upwards, covering up your phallus. And I'm like, I can't even understand how that works. And I'm not inflexible. I am not inflexible. If I stretch out for a little bit, I can surely kick above my head. If I stretch out for a little bit, my old wrestling muscles snap back into place, and I could kick a 7-foot dude in the face by just standing on the ground. I don't even have to jump to do that shit. So I'm not inflexible, but I still can't figure out how to sit down with your heel on your anus. I can't. All right. Chapter 2. The stuff that I like in chapter 2 is all about the mantra yoga. And that's, it's how you use to time, it's this like phrase that you could use to like time your breathing and all these difficult, useful mantras and stuff. I'm going to get to the reading here. I don't have any reading for this one. What? Okay. So anyhow, it just reminds me back to the Gnostic thing. It makes me think of, like almost everything makes me think of. It makes me think of Dune and the Litany against fear. So when he's still on Caladan, the Reverend Mother, Gaius Helen Mohim comes to Paul Atreides at night, not in a good way. And she makes him put his hand in a box, and she holds at his neck a poison needle called the Gom Jabbar, and she uses her voice trickery to make Paul feel pain in the box. And it's just like this yoga thing that Crowley is talking about. It starts with an itch, and it leads to a burning sensation. So when he's talking about an asana, he's saying that you'll have to get used to muscle cramps and muscle spasms and tendon problems and pains and all this stuff. When you come out the other end, it's all good. You realize your body doesn't mean anything, basically. So this whole thing reminded me of this Gom Jabbar, this box test from the Reverend Mother to Paul. And if you see the movie, like the 80s movie that David Lynch directed, there's parts in here for sure. But Paul, okay, so there's this thing called the Litany against fear. So when the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Moham compelled Paul to put his right hand in a vice that caused pain as a test for his perseverance of mind with a Gom Jabbar at his neck, the litany helped him to withstand the excruciating agony. It was a test of his humanity in a qualitative sense. A person whose nature is still primarily bestial recoils from the pain and seeks to flee it to preserve itself. A person of a higher nature goes through it and out the other side in order to remove the threat permanently. The Reverend Mother says, "You've heard of animals chewing off their legs to escape a trap? There's an animal kind of trick. A human would remain in a trap, endure the pain, feigning death that he might kill the trapper and remove the threat to his kind." So she makes him put his hand in the box, and she goes, "It starts with an itch." And like you could see, and like Paul's like really fucked up over this itching and this burning in his hand. And all of a sudden he breaks out this litany against fear. And he says, all you out there that know this, say it with me, okay? He says, "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it is gone past, I will turn my inner eye to see its path. Where fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain." I just gave myself the chills, bros. I fucking love Dune. Dune. Anyhow, I think this litany against fear is Frank Herbert's version of what Crowley is talking about here. So we're going to move into chapter 2, Yama and Niyama. And there's this part sort of stripping morality out of this whole meditation practice. And so we're going back to the book now. Not Frank Herbert's book, Dune. We're going back to Crowley's book that we're supposed to be talking about this whole time. The Hindus have placed these two attainments on the forefront of their program. They are the moral qualities and good works, which are supposed to predispose to mental calm. Yama consists of non-killing, truthfulness, non-stealing, continence, and non-receiving of any gift. In the Buddhist system, sila, virtue, is similarly enjoyed. The qualities are, for the layman, these 5. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not commit adultery. And thou shalt drink no intoxicating drink. For the monk, many others are added. No intoxicating drink? Here's your health. The commandments of Moses are familiar to all, but they are rather similar, and so they are given by Christ in the Sermon on the Mount. Some of these are only the virtues of a slave, invented by his master to keep him in order. The real point of Hindu Yama is that breaking any of these would tend to excite the mind. Subsequent theologians have tried to improve upon the teachings of these masters and have given a sort of mystical importance to these virtues. They have insisted upon them for their own sake and turned them into Puritanism and formalism, thus non-killing, which originally meant do not excite yourself by stalking tigers, has been interpreted to mean that it is a crime to drink water that has not been strained, lest you kill the animalcula. The constant worry, this fear of killing anything by mischance, is on the whole worse than a hand-to-hand conflict with a grizzly bear, Crowley says. If the barking of a dog disturbs your meditation, it is simplest to shoot the dog and think no more about it. Trigger warning. You should have gave me a trigger warning if he was going to kill that dog. Oh my God, he killed the dog. We may then dismiss Yama and Niyama with this advice. Let the student decide for himself what form of life, what moral code, what least tend to excite his mind. But once he has formulated it, let him stick to it, avoiding opportunism. And let him be very careful to take no credit for what he does or refrains from doing. It is purely practical code of no value in itself. I said, no, there we go.
Are you interested in the occult, history, conspiracy, and violence? Learn more at abracast.com. Find more episodes on this topic. Sign up for the mailing list for bonus content. Get access to the show archive. And visit the storefront for tarot cards, merch, and books. Learn more at abracast.com.
Trigger warning. Chapter 4 is Pratyahara, which is the first part of this mental task. Asana, Pranayama, Yama, and Niyama are all acts of the body, while Matra Yoga is connected with the speech. Pranayama is purely mental. back to the book. It means of our present purpose a process rather strategical than practical. It is an introspection, a sort of general examination of the contents of the mind, which we wish to control. Asana, having been mastered, all immediate exciting causes having been removed, and we are free to think of what we're thinking about. A very similar experience to the asana is in store for us. First, we shall very likely flatter ourselves that our minds are pretty calm. That is a defect of observation, just as the European standing for the first time on the edge of a desert will see nothing there, while his Arab can tell him the family history of each of the 50 persons in view, because he has learnt how to look. So with practice, the thoughts will become more numerous and more insistent. As soon as the body was accurately observed, it was found to be terribly restless and painful. Now that we observe the mind, it is seen to be more restless and painful still. So I've got to say that is a thing. As I've been working and reading with this stuff all week, I have been noticed, like I always knew I was fidgety. I will remember sitting in church and constantly my mom or my grandmother putting their hands on my legs being like, yo, fucking knock the jittery feet off, will you? And so I've learned it, and like it's funny because as I'm reading this, I'm jiggling my leg, and I'm like, I have to be more still. I have to learn to be more still. Even now, I've been thinking about it all week, and it's still not still. A similar curve, back to the book, a similar curve might be plotted for the real and apparent painfulness of asana. Conscious of this fact, we begin to try to control it. Not quite so many thoughts, please. Don't think quite so fast, please. No more of that kind of thought, please. It is only then that we discover that what we thought was a school of playful purposes is really the convolutions of a sea serpent. I'm sorry, I guess that was a school of playful porpoises, is really the convulsions of the sea serpent. An attempt to repress has the effect of exciting. When the unsuspecting pupil first approaches his holy but wily guru, and he demands magical powers, the wise one replies that he will confirm them, and he points out with much caution and secrecy some peculiar spot on the pupil's body which has never previously attracted his attention. And he says, in order to obtain this magical power which you seek, all that is necessary is to wash 7 times in the Ganges during 7 days, being particularly careful to avoid thinking of this one spot. Of course, the unhappy youth spends a disgusting week thinking of little else. It is positively amazing that the persistence of thought, or even a whole train of thought, returns again and again to the charge, and it becomes a positive nightmare. It is intensely annoying, too, to find one does not become conscious, and that one has got on to the forbidden subject until one has gone right through with it. However, one continues day after day investigating thoughts and trying to check them, and sooner or later one proceeds to the next stage, dharana, the attempt to restrain the mind to a single object. Well, I got to take a break here and say I've experienced this before firsthand. I have been like, I don't want to think of this shit anymore, and every fucking second my mind drifts, I start thinking about it. It was pretty recent. A few years ago, I was at a horror convention, and I had never heard of the Human Centipede. And then at the convention was the lady who was, I guess she was the middle segment of the first Human Centipede. And I was like, man, she is so pleasant. What is this movie that she's in that everybody's talking about? And a guy explained it to me, and I'm like, oh God, who would want to watch that? And literally for a month and a half, until I was like, I'm just going to go watch this fucking movie because I can't get the premise out of my brain. Of course, it's some crazy European guy that made this movie. It's some fucking German or something that made this movie. But, I had to I was like, fine, I'm going to break down. I'm going to watch this movie because I can't get the fucking premise out of my head. I don't know why I'm sharing this with you because it's disgusting. I'm sure everyone knows what it is by now. I'm sure half of you guys out there are laughing at me, but I mean, whatever. Yes, she is the one with the side boob that everyone talks about. That's right. Back to the book. However, the main point is to acquire some sort of inhibitory power over the thoughts. Fortunately, there is an unfailing method of acquiring this power. We've already talked about this. It is given in Liber 3. If sections 1 and section 2 are practiced, if necessary, with the assistance of another person to aid your vigilance, you will soon be able to master the final section. My fucking arms look like I was in a Vietnamese POW camp counting down the days by the time I got done with my Liber 3 challenge. Some people, this inhibitory power may flower suddenly in very much the same way as it had occurred with asana. Quite without any relaxation of vigilance, the mind will suddenly be stilled. There will be a marvelous feeling of peace and rest, quite different from the lethargic feeling which is produced by overeating. It is difficult to say whether so definite a result would come to all, or even most people. The matter is one of no very great importance. If you acquire the power of checking the rise of thought, you may proceed to the next stage. So chapter 5 is called Dharana. We've learned to observe the mind. This is a way to sort of focus the mind into a single point. Here we go. We know that it is fairly easy for the ordinary educated mind to think without much distraction on a subject which must be interested. We have the popular phrase, to revolve a thing. In the mind, and as long as the subject is sufficiently complex, as long as the thoughts passed freely, there is no great difficulty. So long as a gyroscope is in motion, it remains motionless, relatively to support and even resist attempts to distract it. When it stops, it falls from that position. If Earth ceased to spin around the sun, it would at once fall into the sun. The moment that the student takes a simple subject rather than a simple object and imagines it or visualizes it, he will find that is not so much the creature as he supposed. Other thoughts will invade the mind as to the object is altogether forgotten, perhaps for whole minutes at a time. And at other times, the object itself will begin to play all sorts of tricks. Suppose you have chosen a white cross. It will move its bar up and down, elongate the bar, turn the bar oblique, and get its arms unequal, and turn upside down, and grow branches, and get a crack around it, or a figure upon it, change its shape altogether like an amoeba, change its size and distance as a whole, change the degree of its illumination, and at the same time, change its color. It will get splotchy and blotchy, and it'll grow patterns, rise and fall, and twist and turn, and clouds will pass over its face, and there is no conceivable image of which is incapable, not to mention its total disappearance and replacement by something altogether different. And then, so chapter 6 is Dhyana. And this is a magnification or intensification of Dharana. Dharana. Patanjali says, Dharana is holding the mind onto something particular object, an unbroken flow of knowledge in that subject. And dhyana, when that giving up all forms reflects only the meaning, it is samadhi. The book goes on to say, it is discussing dhyana, then let it be clearly understood that something unexpected is about to be described. We shall consider its nature, the estimate, its value is perfectly unbiased way without allowing ourselves the usual rhapsodies or deducing any theory of the universe. One extra fact may destroy some existing theory that is common enough, but no single fact is sufficient to construct one. It will have been understood that dharana and dhyana and samadhi form a continuous process, and exactly when the climax comes does not matter. It is of this climax we must speak, for this is the matter of experience, and a very striking one. In the course of our concentration, we notice that the contents of the mind at any moment are consisted of two things and no more. The object, variable, and the subject, invariable, or apparently so. By success in dharana, the object has been made as invariable as the subject. Now the result of this subject is the two become one, just like the song says. Breathe in union. Breathe in union. This phenomenon usually comes as a tremendous shock. It is indestructible even by the masters of language, and it is therefore not surprising that semi-educated stutterers wallow in oceans of gush. All the poetic faculties and all the emotional faculties are thrown into sort of ecstasy by an occurrence which overthrows the mind and makes the rest of life seem absolutely worthless in comparison. Good literature is principally a matter of a clear observation and a good judgment expressed in the simple way. For this reason, none of the great events of history, such as earthquakes and battles, have been well described by eyewitnesses unless one of those eyewitnesses were out of danger. But even when one has become accustomed to dhyana by constant repetition, no words seem adequate. One of the simplest forms of dhyana may be called the sun. The sun is seen, as it were, by itself and not by an observer. And although the physical eye cannot behold the sun, one is compelled to make the statement that this sun is far more brilliant than the sun of nature. The whole thing takes place on a higher level. Also, the conditions of thought, time, and space are abolished. It is impossible to explain what this really means. Only experience can furnish you with apprehension. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We may, however, provisionally accept that the view that dhyana is real, and thus of more importance to ourselves than others experience. The state has been described not only by the Hindus and Buddhists, but by Mohammed and Christians. In Christian writings, however, the deep-seated dogmatic bias has rendered their documents worthless to the average man. They ignore the essential conditions of dhyana and insist on an inessential to a much greater extent than the best Indian writers. But to anyone with experience and some knowledge of comparative religion, the identity is certain. And now we may proceed with Samadhi. Chapter 7, Samadhi. Just as we mentioned above, what is Samadhi? The most reasonable statement of any acknowledged authority is that of Vajnavalkya, who says, by Pranayama, impurities of the body are thrown out. By Dharana, the impurities of the mind. By Pratihara, the impurities of attachment, and by Samadhi, is taking off everything that hides the lordship of the souls. This modest statement in good literary form can only do as well as that. Well, I'll say, I mean, that is a Gnostic statement if I ever heard it. Power grows faster than desire. The boy who wants money to buy lead soldiers sets to work to obtain it. And by the time he has got it, wants something else instead. In all probability, something just beyond his means. Such is the splendid history and spiritual advance. No one stops to take the reward. We shall therefore not trouble at all about what any samadhi may or may not bring as far as it results in our lives are concerned. We begin this book with, and it will be remembered with the considerations of death. And death has now lost all meaning. The idea that death depends on those of the ego and of the time these ideals have been destroyed, and so death is swallowed up in victory. We shall now only be interested in what samadhi in itself. It is the condition which cause it. Let us try a final definition. Dhyana resembles samadhi in many respects. There is a union of the ego and the non-ego. And at a loss of these senses of time and space and casualty, duality in any form abolish the ideas of time that involves the two consecutive things, that of space, two non-coincident things, and that of causing two connected things. Skip ahead a little bit. The normal mind is a candle in a darkened room, and throw open the shutters and the sunlight makes the flame invisible. That is a fair image of Dhyana. The mind refuses to find a smile. Oh, God. I tried this last night like 80 times. Atma Darshana, and seems merely ineffective to say that the rushing together of all the hosts of heaven would similarly blot out the sun. If we do say so, that wish to form a further image of Shiva Darshana, we must imagine ourselves as suddenly recognizing the universal blaze is darkness, not light extremely dim compared with some other light, but darkness itself. It is not the change from the minute to vast, or even from the finite to infinite. It is the recognition that the positive is merely the negative. The ultimate truth is perceived not only as false, but as the logical contradictory of truth. It is quite useless the elaborate this theme, which has baffled all other minds hitherto. We have tried to say as little as possible rather than as much as possible. So farther from our present purpose would be to criticize the innumerable discussions which have taken place as to whether this or the ultimate attainment or what it confers. It is enough if we say that even if the first most transitory dhyana replays 1,000 pains that we have taken to attain it, and there is an anchor for beginners, that this work is cumulative. Every act directed towards attainment builds up destiny, which must someday come from fruition. May all attain. All right. I'm John Towers. This has been the Abercast. This is Liber 4, Part 1. The Lessons of Liber 4, Part 1, Mysticism. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for all your support. Rate and review on iTunes. Find the website, stigmatastudios.com or abercast.com. Find the social media links at the bottom. And, what am I forgetting? Newsletter. We're rolling out the newsletter. We're not actually rolling out the newsletter, but we are kind of rolling out the newsletter. And then Patreon. If this is on the normal stream, then you need to check out Patreon, son.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please send an email or find us on social media and let us know what you think about the show. We would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rate and review wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find Stigmata Studios, graphic, novels, and comic books at apricast.com.